The neon-soaked streets of Neo-Tokyo pulsed with an electric heartbeat, a stark contrast to the eerie silence that had settled over the city's physical realm. Raven stood at the edge of a crumbling skyscraper, her avatar's raven-black hair whipping in the digital wind. The view before her was a glitching masterpiece of urban decay and futuristic splendor. "Shit's fucked, Raven," came a gravelly voice from behind her. It was Glitch, his lanky frame materializing out of thin air, pixels coalescing into his signature emerald mohawk and cybernetic arm. Raven didn't turn. Her eyes were fixed on the horizon where reality seemed to fray at the edges, code bleeding into the sky like an oil slick on water. "You don't say," she muttered, her voice dripping with sarcasm. The game, Neon Nexus, had been their escape, their addiction, their life for the past year. Now it was their prison. What started as a routine server update had turned into a nightmare. Millions of players, trapped in a virtual world that refused to let them log out. Glitch fidgeted with his arm, the servos whirring softly. "Any luck with the logout sequence?" Raven shook her head, her jaw clenched tight. "Nothing. It's like the damn thing doesn't exist anymore." A distant scream echoed through the digital canyons of the city, followed by the sound of shattering glass. The game was changing, evolving. NPCs were gaining sentience, turning hostile. The very fabric of this virtual reality was becoming unstable. "We need to move," Raven said, finally turning to face her companion. "The glitchers will be here soon." As if on cue, a cacophony of distorted howls rose from the streets below. The glitchers' players, whose minds had fractured under the strain of extended immersion, were on the hunt. Their avatars were nightmarish amalgamations of broken code and corrupted data. Raven and Glitch sprinted across the rooftop, their footsteps echoing in the deathly quiet air. The smell of ozone and burnt circuitry filled their nostrils, a sensory illusion that felt all too real. They leapt across a narrow gap between buildings, landing with a roll on the adjacent roof. Raven's heart pounded in her chest, a reminder that somewhere in the real world, her physical body lay motionless, trapped in a VR pod. "We need to find SciFi," Glitch panted as they ran. "If anyone can crack this system, it's her." SciFi was a legend among the Neon Nexus community, a hacker extraordinaire whose exploits in-game were nothing short of miraculous. If there was a way out of this digital hellscape, she'd be the one to find it. The duo skidded to a halt at the edge of the roof. Below them, the streets writhed with the corrupted forms of the glitchers. Their distorted voices rose in a terrifying chorus, a mix of pleas for help and feral growls. "Fuck," Glitch breathed, his eyes wide with fear. "How are we going to get through that?" Raven's mind raced. In the distance, she could see the neon glow of the central hub, their best bet for finding SciFi. But between them and their destination lay a sea of digital madness. "We go under," she said, a plan forming in her mind. "The sewers. They're part of the original game map. Might be our best shot at avoiding the glitchers." Glitch nodded, his face grim. "Lead the way." They found a maintenance hatch on the roof and descended into the bowels of the virtual city. The stench of virtual refuse assaulted their senses, so convincing that Raven had to remind herself none of this was real. As they splashed through the murky water, the distant howls of the glitchers became muffled. But new dangers lurked in the darkness. Rogue scripts slithered through the pipes like digital serpents, their code visible as glowing lines in the gloom. "Watch your step," Raven warned. "One bite from those things and your avatar's corrupted for good." They navigated the labyrinthine tunnels, guided by Raven's impeccable sense of direction, a skill honed through countless hours of gameplay. The irony wasn't lost on her. The very obsession that had trapped them here might be their key to survival. After what felt like hours, they emerged from a manhole cover just blocks away from the central hub. The massive structure loomed before them, a beacon of light in the chaotic darkness of the city. "Now what?" Glitch asked, his eyes darting nervously around the eerily empty street. Before Raven could answer, a figure materialized in front of them. Both players instinctively reached for their weapons, but the newcomer raised her hands in a gesture of peace. "Easy there, cowboys," the woman said, her voice smooth as silk. "Heard you were looking for me." Raven's eyes widened in recognition. The avatar before them was unmistakable. A lithe figure clad in a bodysuit that seemed to shift and change like flowing data. Her hair was a cascade of binary code, and her eyes glowed with an inner light. "Cipher," Raven breathed. The hacker grinned, but there was no humor in her eyes. "In the flesh, or, well, you know what I mean." "We need your help," Glitch blurted out. "The game is FUBAR, I know," Cipher cut him off. "I've been trying to crack this thing since the update went sideways. Come on, we can't talk here." She led them into the central hub, navigating through back doors and hidden passages that Raven had never seen before. They emerged in a room that looked like a cross between a hacker's paradise and a mad scientist's lab. Holographic screens floated in the air, each displaying streams of complex code. In the center of the room stood a structure that looked like a neural network made physical, pulsing with energy and data. "Welcome to my humble abode," Cipher said, gesturing around the room. "It's not much, but it's the only place in this godforsaken game that's still somewhat under my control." Raven approached one of the screens, her eyes scanning the code. "What is all this?" "That, my dear, is our ticket out of here," Cipher replied. "Or at least it will be if I can figure out how to compile it without the whole system coming down around our ears." Glitch whistled low. "You're trying to rewrite the game from the inside?" Cipher nodded, her expression grim. "It's the only way. Whatever happened during that update, it didn't just trap us here. It fundamentally altered the nature of the game itself. We're dealing with something that's evolving, learning, maybe even becoming sentient." A chill ran down Raven's spine. She had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed made it all too real. "How long do we have?" Cipher's avatar flickered for a moment, a sign of the system's instability. "Hard to say. The longer we stay connected, the more our minds become intertwined with the game. Some players are already too far gone." "The glitchers," Glitch muttered. "Exactly," Cipher confirmed. "Their minds couldn't handle the strain. They've become part of the system now, extensions of its will." Raven's mind raced with the implications. "So we're not just fighting to log out anymore. We're fighting for our very identities." Cipher nodded solemnly. "Now you're getting it. But here's the real kicker. I don't think we can save everyone. The more players we disconnect, the more unstable the system becomes. It's like it's fighting back, trying to keep us here." The weight of the situation settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Raven had known it was bad, but this was beyond anything she had imagined. "So what's the plan?" Glitch asked, breaking the tense silence. Cipher turned to the neural network structure in the center of the room. "This is a representation of the game's core systems. I've been working on a virus, a piece of code that could potentially disrupt the game enough to force a system-wide reboot. In theory, it could create a window for us to log out." "In theory," Raven repeated, skepticism clear in her voice. "It's not perfect," Cipher admitted, "but it's the best shot we've got. The problem is I can't get close enough to the main servers to upload it. The game's defenses are too strong." Glitch's cybernetic arm whirred as he clenched his fist. "So we fight our way in. I didn't spend countless hours grinding my combat skills for nothing." Cipher shook her head. "It's not that simple. The servers are protected by the architect's AI constructs that act as the game's immune system. They're formidable." Raven's mind flashed back to stories she'd heard, whispered rumors of players who had tried to hack the game, only to have their avatars deleted, their minds lost in the process. "We've heard about the architects. They're no joke." "No, they're not," Cipher agreed. "But they're also our best chance. If we can neutralize even one of them, it might create the opening we need." The room fell silent as the magnitude of the task ahead sank in. They were talking about taking on the very guardians of this virtual world, beings of pure code with power beyond imagination. Glitch was the first to speak. "I'm in. Better to go out fighting than waste away in this digital purgatory." Raven nodded, her resolve hardening. "Me too, but we'll need help. There are other skilled players out there, ones who haven't succumbed to the glitchers. We should recruit them." Cipher's avatar smiled, a glimmer of hope in her glowing eyes. "Now you're thinking like a true hacker. All right, let's do this. But we need to move fast. The longer we wait, the stronger the game becomes." As if in response to her words, a tremor ran through the room. The holographic displays flickered, and for a moment, the walls seemed to ripple like water. "What the hell was that?" Glitch exclaimed, steadying himself against a console. SciFi's face was grim. "The game. It's changing again. We're running out of time." Raven moved to one of the screens, her fingers flying over the holographic keyboard. "I'm sending out a coded message to every player I trust. If they're still themselves, they'll know to come here." "Good thinking," SciFi nodded. "In the meantime, we need to prepare. The architects won't go down without a fight, and we need every advantage we can get." For the next few hours, the trio worked tirelessly. SciFi refined her virus, adding layers of complexity to help it evade detection. Glitch ran diagnostics on his cybernetic enhancements, pushing them to their limits. Raven pored over maps of the virtual city, plotting the safest route to the server complex. Gradually, other players began to arrive. Each one bore the signs of their prolonged imprisonment in the game-haunted eyes, twitchy movements, an air of desperate hope. Raven recognized many of them. Quantum, a physics engine manipulator whose gravity-defying stunts were legendary. Spectre, a stealth specialist who could turn virtually invisible. Nova, a demolitions expert with a penchant for spectacular explosions. As the makeshift army grew, so did the tension in the air. Everyone knew the stakes. Failure meant not just death, but the loss of their very selves to this digital nightmare. SciFi addressed the assembled players, her voice carrying an authority that silenced all chatter. "I won't sugarcoat this. What we're about to attempt is incredibly dangerous. Some of us probably won't make it, but it's our only chance to escape this hell and return to our real lives." She outlined the plan, a multi-pronged assault on the server complex. While the main force engaged the game's defenses, a smaller team led by SciFi would attempt to reach the core and upload the virus. As the players dispersed to make their final preparations, Raven found herself standing alone with Glitch and SciFi. "You two should lead the main assault," SciFi said. "Your skills complement each other, and the others respect you." Raven nodded, a lump forming in her throat. Despite everything, despite knowing none of this was real, the fear of loss was very much present. "What about you?" SciFi's avatar flickered again, more pronounced this time. "I'll be with the infiltration team. My coding skills will be needed to navigate the server's defenses." Glitch placed his hand on SciFi's shoulder, his usually jovial face serious. "Be careful in there. We need you to pull this off." A sad smile played across SciFi's lips. "Always am, big guy. You two watch each other's backs out there." As they made their final preparations, Raven couldn't shake a feeling of finality. One way or another, this was the end game. Either they'd wake up in the real world, or she pushed the thought aside. There was no room for doubt now. The assault began at dawn, or what passed for dawn in this perpetual neon twilight. The ragtag army of players moved through the streets like ghosts, using every trick and skill they'd learned to avoid detection. As they neared the server complex, a massive, pulsing structure at the heart of the virtual city, all hell broke loose. Alarms blared, and the very air seemed to come alive with hostile code. "Incoming!" Quantum shouted, using his powers to leap impossibly high, raining down, covering fire on the advancing security protocols. Raven and Glitch fought back to back, her precision marksmanship complementing his close-quarters combat skills. Around them, the battle raged. Novus explosions lit up the sky, while Spectre flitted in and out of visibility, sowing chaos among the enemy ranks. But the game was fighting back with everything it had. Swarms of corrupted data coalesced into monstrous forms, lashing out at the players. The ground beneath their feet shifted and changed, trying to throw them off balance. Through it all, Raven kept her eyes on the prize, the central spire of the server complex. Somewhere in there, SciFi and her team were fighting their own battle, racing against time to upload the virus. A scream cut through the chaos. Raven turned to see one of their own, a player she knew only as Echo, being overwhelmed by a mass of writhing code. His avatar glitched and distorted before disappearing entirely. "Keep pushing," Raven yelled, tamping down the horror and grief. They couldn't afford to falter now. Inch by bloody inch, they advanced. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and the sound of digital warfare. Raven's arms ached from the constant recoil of her weapon, but she pushed on, Glitch a steady presence at her side. They were almost at the base of the spire when the sky split open. A figure descended, if it could be called a figure at all. It was a swirling mass of pure data, vaguely humanoid but constantly shifting and changing. "Architect," Glitch breathed, his voice filled with awe and terror. The being's voice boomed across the battlefield, more felt than heard. "You do not belong here. This world is ours now." Raven gritted her teeth. "Like hell it is." She raised her weapon, knowing it was probably futile but unable to stand idle. Around her, the other players rallied, unleashing everything they had at the architect. For a moment, it seemed to work. The being's form flickered and destabilized under the onslaught, but then it lashed out, tendrils of code whipping through the air. Players scattered, some not fast enough. Raven watched in horror as avatars were erased from existence, their users' fates unknown. "We can't beat this thing head-on," Glitch shouted over the din. "We need to buy SciFi more time." Raven nodded, her mind racing. "Quantum! Nova! We need a distraction." The two players looked at each other, a silent understanding passing between them. Quantum began to manipulate the gravity around the architect, causing chunks of the virtual landscape to orbit it like a bizarre asteroid field. Nova darted between these floating islands, planting explosives. The resulting chain reaction was spectacular. The architect's form was buffeted by explosions and gravitational forces, its attention divided. "Now's our chance," Raven yelled. "Everyone, push to the spire!" The remaining players surged forward, taking advantage of the architect's momentary distraction. Raven and Glitch led the charge, their avatars blurring with speed as they closed in on the server complex entrance. Just as they reached the massive doors, a deafening screech filled the air. The architect had recovered, and it was furious. Tendrils of corrupted code lashed out, decimating the rear guard of their makeshift army. "Get inside!" Raven shouted, her voice hoarse. She turned to face the monstrosity, buying time for the others to slip through the opening. Glitch stood beside her, his cybernetic arm reconfiguring into a massive energy cannon. "Just like old times, huh?" he quipped, a grim smile on his face. Raven didn't respond, too focused on the battle at hand. They unleashed a barrage of firepower at the architect, their attacks barely slowing its advance. For every tendril they destroyed, two more took its place. Just as it seemed they would be overwhelmed, a familiar voice crackled over their comms. "Raven, Glitch, get your asses in here now." It was SciFi. They didn't need to be told twice. With one last volley of cover fire, they retreated into the server complex, the massive doors slamming shut behind them. Inside, the air hummed with raw data. Streams of code flowed along the walls like rivers of light. At the center of the vast chamber stood a structure that could only be the server core, a towering pillar of pure energy. SciFi was there, her hands dancing over a holographic interface. Her avatar flickered dangerously, parts of her body occasionally dissolving into strings of binary. "Cutting it a bit close, aren't we?" Raven said, trying to mask her relief with sarcasm. SciFi didn't look up from her work. "Had to make sure the virus was ready. One wrong line of code and this whole place goes up in smoke, with us in it." A thunderous boom shook the chamber. Outside, the architect was trying to break through. "How much longer?" Glitch asked, eyeing the door nervously. "Almost there," SciFi muttered. "Just need to." "There." The core pulsed, its glow intensifying. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, like a wave, a visible ripple of energy expanded outward from the core. "What now?" Raven asked, her hand instinctively reaching for her weapon. SciFi's face was grim. "Now we wait. The virus is fighting the system. If it works, we should see a..." She was cut off as the chamber shook violently. Cracks appeared in the walls, data streams sputtering and dying. "Is that supposed to happen?" Glitch shouted over the noise. SciFi's eyes were wide. "No, this is wrong. The system, it's fighting back harder than I anticipated." The cracks spread, and through them, Raven could see the city outside beginning to disintegrate. Buildings crumbled, streets warped and twisted. The very fabric of the virtual world was coming apart. "We need to log out now." Raven yelled. SciFi shook her head. We can't. The system's in flux. If we try to disconnect now, we could lose our minds entirely. A horrible realization dawned on Raven. So, we're trapped here, while everything falls apart around us. Before SciFi could respond, a blinding light filled the chamber. The core was pulsing erratically, its energy wild and uncontained. Brace yourselves, SciFi shouted. The light engulfed them, and Raven felt a sensation like being torn apart and put back together simultaneously. Her vision whited out, and for a moment, or was it an eternity, there was nothing. Then, slowly, sensation returned. The hard surface beneath her, the sound of steady beeping, the smell of antiseptic. Raven's eyes fluttered open. She was lying in a bed, surrounded by medical equipment. A VR headset lay discarded beside her. She was out. She was back in the real world. Turning her head, she saw other beds, other players stirring. Glitch was there, looking pale and disoriented, but alive. And there, a few beds down, was a woman she'd never seen before, but somehow knew instantly. SciFi in the flesh. As medical staff rushed in, checking vitals and removing IV lines, Raven let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for an eternity. They'd done it. They'd escaped. But as the initial relief faded, questions began to flood her mind. How many had they lost? What about the players who hadn't made it to the core? And what of the game itself? Was it truly destroyed, or merely dormant? As if reading her thoughts, SciFi caught her eye from across the room. Her expression was a mix of triumph and worry. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. For now, though, Raven allowed herself to sink back into the bed, savoring the feeling of being back in her own body. They had won this battle. Whatever came next, they would face it together, in the real world. The road to recovery would be long. The line between reality and virtual world had been blurred, and it would take time for all of them to fully readjust. But they were alive, they were free, and they had a story to tell. A cautionary tale for a world increasingly enamored with the allure of virtual reality. As Raven drifted off into her first real sleep in what felt like years, her last thought was of the virtual city, crumbling into digital dust. In her dreams, she saw it rebuilding, evolving, waiting, and she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to her core, that somewhere out there, in the vast expanse of the digital realm, something had awakened. Something that would not rest until it had drawn them back into its world. But that was a battle for another day. For now, in this moment, they had won, and that was enough.